Welcome back to the Session Leader training session. This module is about how to build a collaborative agenda. And right now, we are in Module 3 of 6 modules. You have been introduced to ThinkTank. You've had a chance to see ThinkTank for yourself and figure out, discuss with others what it could be used for. And now it's time to look at how to build a structured agenda for collaboration. My name is Niels Randrup, and I'm responsible for global learning at ThinkTank. The purpose of this session is, of course, to introduce you to how to build a collaborative agenda. We are not going to make you collaboration experts, collaboration engineers. However, what we want to do is share a few of the key insights about how to make a good professional collaborative agenda. We will introduce a couple of key models, for instance, an overview of the planning model, the guidelines for preparation, and the 6 patterns of collaboration. Those are some of the core tools that we typically always use to plan out a professional collaboration session. And you will also have a chance to execute an exercise to train your skills in professional agenda building for collaboration sessions. Let's take a look at the first model. It's called the pre-session planning overview, and what it does is basically outline what are the key purposes, activities, and outputs of planning for a session. First step is to define the objectives and strategy. Basically, there are 3 key activities involved. You need to define the purpose. The purpose is the objective of the session or the collaboration process. The purpose of the session typically leads to a production of one or another type of deliverable or work product. So of course you need to define the work products necessary for the session or for the collaboration process. Deliverables needs to define in details. The third thing you need to do is to decide what type of investments of time for which people. If you need assets, resources in terms of money, or locations as well, you need to decide that. Second step is the session planning. This is where the bulk of the work is done in terms of planning. First of all, we talk about designing an agenda, a collaborative process. That's step number 1. Once we've designed the agenda and the collaborative process, we design procedures for how to execute the session. Step number 6 deals with how to build a think tank session for the agenda that we have planned and for the procedures that can execute those. Number 7 would be considering other types of tools that we need. That can, for instance, be an audio channel if we do a virtual meeting. So what conference software we're going to use for that. Are we using Skype, or are we using a call-in teleconference system? And the last step is to design guidelines for the participants or thinkers, as we call them, in the session and the session leader. The last phase of preparation has to do with practical information. Here, there's a lot of different activities that are normally done, but if you've run a number of sessions before and as an experienced facilitator, you probably know all the practical details. So what we're going to focus on here, to going a little more into depth with, is the objectives and strategy and the session planning. In order to do a professional definition of an objective and strategy for a collaborative session, we usually have a checklist of things that we use in order to check the quality of the work. So when we look at a purpose definition for collaboration process or session, we look for the quality and the existence of goals and objectives defined. Normally that's not an issue. Most people can do that. Secondly, we look for background information that explains to us what has led up to this session or this collaboration process coming into effect. If there are any issues that the collaboration session are going to solve, we are looking into what issues are they. Have there been problems producing the goals or outputs in the past? If so, what are the problems getting there? And the last one is the description of the value of the output. So who will have what value out of us producing the output. Second area we're looking into are deliverables. Here we look for a very tangible, specific, and often physical description of what needs to be the tangible outcomes of the session. We look for definition of results. We look for specific output definitions. This can be what templates to use. It can be the length of the document, that is type of a scope. It can be the quality levels, when is it good enough. And we look for deadlines in terms of when the deliverables need to be delivered and also to whom and where. Third area we're looking for is the resource discussion. First of all, normally we look for a description of roles and responsibilities. So what type of people with what competences are needed to produce the best outcome possible. Then based on that one, who should then be the participants or thinkers in the session? Who should be the leaders? And what type of investments in terms of work hours or resources, and if there's a budget for the collaboration process, what is the budget being invested in the collaboration session? Those are the things that we will be looking for in a good description of the objectives and strategy for a session. So that was basically a short description of the objectives and strategy in the pre-session planning. Let's look at number 2, session planning itself. In order to plan a session well, we typically talk about 6 steps. First of all, we are talking about designing the general agenda of a session. This is what we also call the general logic of what needs to happen in order to deliver the deliverables and to reach the objectives of the session. Second step is then detailing the agenda. We call this building blocks. So every single point on the agenda needs to be defined in detail in order to define what actually takes place. This is probably the biggest difference between, let's say, a normal agenda where you don't use the digital means and an agenda for structured collaboration with software. Because the building blocks actually specify in detail what's going to happen during the session, and without the building blocks defined well, we will not be able to make an appropriate think tank session. So this is a necessary step for most practitioners to take. If you are a professional facilitator, you will already know this by heart, that you need to, of course, detail every single thing that you want to do if you want to enable that with digital tools or templates. Step number 3 is to, for each building block, to choose what type of facilitation techniques are you going to use to execute the building blocks by. The professional facilitators or collaboration experts will know the concept of thinklets, which is a repeatable pattern of collaboration that are standardized. But if you're not engaged in collaboration engineering or collaboration research, you might not have heard about these thinklets before. Thinklets is a part of the training in our super user course for the standard session leaders. It's sufficient to say that, of course, you need to define by what technique you will deliver the different elements of your agenda. Step number 4 deals with then how to build a think tank session to enable the agenda, the building blocks, and the techniques that you have chosen. Here we create a think tank session, we add activities to the agenda, we build out the activities needed, and we test the session so it is useful for the actual execution of the collaboration process. Next step is to consider the tools necessary for the actual session. There are some technology requirements, of course. There can be space requirements where you actually run your meeting or session. There might be requirements for the location and venue. There might be requirements for people, could be catering, tech support, other things, or other types of requirements needed. The normal tools that are used for most sessions is, of course, to have an audio channel. If you are in a virtual meeting, it has to be either an IP enabled phone, so that's Skype, or it needs to be an analog model, for instance, a normal conference software, or conference telephone number. The last part of the session planning deals with instructions. These are instructions that can help the participants in the session or the thinkers to execute the actual collaboration session by. These are also instructions for the session leader, so they know how to deliver a professional session, and it can also be instructions for other people participating or delivering part of the collaboration session. These are the normal elements of session planning that are necessary for a full and professional session planning. If you want to read more about these planning tips and processes, you can access the session planning guidelines. That is a document on 11 pages that outlines these things and also go into detail with an explanation of each single element. That was a little in general about the whole session planning phase. Now, of course, the first and most important thing is to design the agenda and the collaboration process itself. So let's take a little bit deeper look into this key activity. What we typically talk about first is to design the logic of a session. There's two types of logic. There's a horizontal logic, which equals the red boxes, and there's a vertical logic, which equals the blue boxes. And beside that, there's a transition from one agenda module to the next module. This is how we start planning and sketching out an agenda. Normally we have agenda points, but under each agenda point we need to consider what type of tasks are needed to be executed in order to fulfill that agenda point. And we need to consider what is then the thing that links the end of the first agenda point to the start of the next, and that is the transition. A good planning principle for the agenda is, of course, to make sure that we know what the work product is, and basically to make sure that the major process or the horizontal logic will actually produce the work product that is needed. Let's look at an example of what such an agenda would look like. This is an agenda where the first point would be to set the stage or to introduce the meeting. The next stage would be to develop ideas, improvement ideas for a project. Third one is to evaluate which of these ideas are best. And then fourth is to choose the best ideas. And the next steps is the last phase where we talk about how we actually start using these ideas in practice. And this one leads to an action plan for implementing some project improvements. Underneath here, for each of these steps in the agenda, you can see that there is a set of specific tasks described in terms of what needs to happen in order to execute the collaboration process. Let's, for one moment, just take the first couple of agenda modules. So the first thing that happens on the setting the stage is that the leader of the session explains and clarifies the purpose, agenda, output needs, and values of completing the collaboration task. Next task is to introduce participants and their skills and competences to the rest of the group. Basically, this is something we do in order to both build trust within the group, but also to make sure that we know why the different people are in the session. Task number 3 deals with sharing examples of past successful improvement projects. So this is an inspiration session that shares information and examples of things that's gone well in the past to both create some motivation, but also to create some reference points to successful improvements that might have an impact on the improvements for the project that we're looking for this project. Last but not least, the fourth task plan is to list and discuss learnings and insights from past improvement projects, so we can capture the learnings and use that for the improvement planning for this project. The transition to the next point will then be to take a break with the group, and in the meantime the organizers, leaders of the session will distribute the key learnings list to the participants so they have a tangible outcome from the first agenda point to be used for the second part of the agenda.